At exactly 8:30 a.m. in London, a decision like this would not begin with applause. It would begin in silence, behind closed doors, inside rooms where history is not announced. It is engineered, because if the monarchy were ever pushed to the edge, if the structure of the House of Windsor were ever forced to adapt in real time, there is one name that would quietly rise to the surface: Zara Tindall. For decades, she has existed just outside the system, close enough to the crown to understand it, but distant enough to live without its weight. No title, no formal royal duties, no obligation to perform for the institution, and yet she remained one of the most respected members of the extended royal family. But what if that balance suddenly broke? What if the monarchy, under pressure, under scrutiny, under strain, had no choice but to bring her in? Not symbolically, not ceremonially, but structurally, because this isn't just about a title. It's about survival. The modern monarchy is no longer sustained by tradition alone. It requires visibility, engagement, relevance, and most importantly, it requires people, working royals, public figures who can carry the weight of appearances, diplomacy, and national identity. And that system has been under pressure. With fewer senior figures actively representing the crown, the workload hasn't decreased. It's expanded, quietly, relentlessly, and behind the scenes. There have been conversations, difficult ones, strategic ones, the kind that don't make headlines, the kind that reshape institutions. Because the question is no longer, who deserves a title? It's, who can carry the system forward? And that's where Zara becomes impossible to ignore. Daughter of Princess Anne, granddaughter of Queen Elizabeth II, raised within the orbit of royalty, but never defined by it. Her life followed a different path. Sport, discipline, competition. She didn't inherit status. She earned recognition. As an Olympic-level equestrian, she built a reputation based on performance, not position. And in a world where public perception matters more than ever, that distinction carries weight. Because today's monarchy doesn't just rely on tradition. It relies on trust. And Zara Tindall has that. But here's where the story becomes more complicated. Because historically, the rules are clear. The children of a monarch's daughter do not automatically receive royal titles. That structure was defined over a century ago, through letters patent issued by King George V in 1917. A system built for a different era, a different monarchy, a different world. But the world has changed, and the monarchy has had to change with it. In 2013, the rules of succession were rewritten. Gender no longer determined priority. A daughter could stand equal to a son, a significant shift, but one inconsistency remained. Titles, styles, the visible markers of royal status, still tied to older rules, and that creates tension, a modern institution operating with outdated frameworks. So if a change were to happen, if the king were to act, it wouldn't be random, it would be strategic, because granting a title isn't just symbolic, it's functional. It activates responsibility. It redefines identity. It transforms a private individual into a public instrument of the crown. And that transformation comes with a cost. Because stepping into the role of a working royal means giving something up. Privacy, freedom, independence, everything that made Zara different would have to be reconsidered. Her commercial partnerships, her personal schedule, her ability to exist outside the system, all of it would change. Because once the title is given, there is no going back. And that's where the real question begins. Not whether it could happen, but whether it should. Because on one side, there's the institution, a monarchy navigating modern pressures, public scrutiny, and structural limitations. On the other, there's a life that has remained deliberately separate from all of that. A life built without titles, without expectations, without the constant weight of duty. And bringing those two worlds together is not a simple decision. It's a trade, one that affects not just Zara, but everyone around her, because becoming a princess isn't about status. It's about service, and service is permanent. If such a decision were ever made, it wouldn't just be a headline. It would be a signal that the monarchy is no longer operating within its traditional boundaries, that it's willing to rewrite its own rules, to preserve its future, and that future depends on people who can bridge the gap between tradition and reality, between history and relevance. And in that space, Zara Tindall stands uniquely positioned, not because she chased a role, but because she never needed it, which, in many ways, makes her exactly the kind of person the modern monarchy would turn to when it has no other choice, because sometimes the strongest additions to a system are the ones that were never part of it to begin with. And if that moment ever comes, if the title is ever given, it won't just change Zara's life. It will redefine what it means to be royal, not by birth, not by tradition, but by necessity. And that is where history truly begins to shift. Because if a moment like this ever arrives, it won't feel like a celebration. It will feel like a shift, a quiet recalibration of something that has stood for centuries. And those shifts don't happen without pressure. They happen when the system reaches a point where doing nothing is no longer an option. The modern monarchy is not insulated from change. It's exposed to it. Every headline, every absence, every public appearance, or lack of one, adds weight to the structure. And over time, that weight accumulates until something has to give. Historically, the strength of the monarchy has always relied on visibility, a presence that reassures continuity, a sense that no matter what changes around it, the institution itself remains steady. But in recent years, that presence has been tested. Fewer working royals, more scrutiny, more expectation from a public that no longer sees tradition as enough on its own. And that's where the conversation quietly begins, not in public statements, but in private discussions, strategic evaluations, questions that don't have easy answers. Who can step forward? Who can carry responsibility without damaging public trust? Who already has credibility without needing to build it? Because credibility can't be manufactured overnight. And this is where Zara Tindall becomes central to the equation, not because she's the most visible, but because she's the most stable. Her public image has remained remarkably consistent, grounded, professional, respected across different audiences. She doesn't rely on royal status to define her identity, which paradoxically makes her more relatable in a time when relatability matters more than ever. And that's the shift we're witnessing. The monarchy is no longer sustained purely by hierarchy. It's sustained by perception, and perception is shaped by connection, by authenticity, by the ability to exist in both worlds at once, the royal and the real. Zara has done that without trying, without positioning herself for it, without asking for it, and that creates a unique kind of leverage. Because when someone doesn't seek power, but is capable of holding it, they become incredibly valuable to a system that needs stability. But here's where the complexity deepens, because bringing someone like Zara into the core structure isn't just about what she gains. It's about what she gives up. And that trade is significant. The life she has built is independent, commercially active, personally flexible, free from the rigid expectations that define working royals. That freedom is rare, and once exchanged for duty, it doesn't return. Because the moment a title is formalized, everything changes. Every appearance becomes official. Every statement becomes measured. Every action becomes part of something larger than the individual. And that level of scrutiny doesn't switch off. So the question becomes unavoidable. Is the institution strong enough to justify that sacrifice? Oh, is a sacrifice being made to protect the institution itself? Because there's a difference. One is about continuity. The other is about survival. And if this kind of decision were ever made, it would suggest something deeper, something structural, a recognition that the traditional model is no longer sufficient on its own, that adaptation is no longer optional. It's necessary, and necessary changes rarely come without consequences, because once the rules are adjusted, they don't just apply to one person. They create precedent. They open doors. They raise questions that extend far beyond the original decision. If one boundary can be moved, why not others? If one exception can be made, what defines a rule? And suddenly, a single decision becomes something much larger, not just about Zara, but about the future of the monarchy itself, its flexibility, its limits, its willingness to evolve. And evolution is never simple. It requires balance between preserving identity and embracing change, between honoring tradition and responding to reality. And in that balance, every move matters. Every choice carries weight, because the monarchy doesn't operate in isolation. It exists within public perception, within cultural relevance, within a global audience that is constantly evaluating what it represents. And in that environment, stability becomes everything, not just the appearance of it, but the reality. And if the system ever turns to someone like Zara, it won't be because it wants to. It will be because it needs to, because she represents something the institution cannot easily create. Trust, consistency, credibility without effort, and in moments of uncertainty, those qualities become more valuable than tradition itself. But even then, nothing is guaranteed, because stepping into that role would place her at the center of everything she has spent her life avoiding. The spotlight, the scrutiny, the expectation. And that's where the human element returns. Because behind every title, behind every role, behind every institutional decision, there is still a person, a life, a set of choices that define who they are outside of all of it. And that doesn't disappear. It adapts, it adjusts, but it remains. So if this moment ever comes, if the line between private life and public duty is finally crossed, it won't just be a royal decision. It will be a personal one that redefines everything, not just for the monarchy, but for the person at the center of it. And maybe that's the part most people overlook, that behind the headlines, behind the speculation, behind the possibility of titles and power, there's something much simpler, a choice between the life you have and the life you're being asked to step into. And sometimes, that's the most difficult decision of all. And in the end, if a moment like this ever truly arrives, it won't be marked by celebration. There will be no grand announcement that fully captures its weight, no headline that explains what was really exchanged behind the scenes. Because what changes in that moment isn't just a title, it's a life. For Zara Tindall, the difference between remaining outside the system and stepping into it is a difference between freedom and responsibility, between privacy and permanent visibility, between living beside the crown and becoming part of its machinery. And once that line is crossed, there is no return to what existed before. Because titles don't just elevate, they bind. They carry expectation. They carry scrutiny. They carry a weight that doesn't fade with time. It grows. And for an institution like the monarchy, that weight is necessary, because survival, in the modern world, is no longer guaranteed by history. It's earned day by day, appearance by appearance, decision by decision. And if the system ever reaches a point where it must evolve to endure, it won't look to the loudest voice or the most visible figure. It will look for something far more rare: stability, trust, consistency under pressure. And that's why this conversation matters, because it isn't really about whether the title is given. It's about what that title represents. A shift, a signal, a quiet acknowledgement that the old structure may no longer be enough on its own, and that the future requires something different, something stronger, something real. But even then, even if everything aligns, even if the institution calls, even if the path is opened, there is still one final truth that cannot be ignored. The crown can offer a role. It can offer responsibility. It can even offer history. But it cannot make the choice, because that choice belongs to the person. And in that moment, away from the cameras, away from the speculation, away from the noise, only one question matters. Is the life you're being asked to live worth the life you have to leave behind? Because sometimes the greatest power isn't in accepting a crown. It's in deciding whether to wear it at all. And that is where the real story ends. And even after that question is asked, even after the silence settles and the weight of the decision becomes clear, life doesn't pause. The world keeps moving. The headlines move on. The attention shifts. But for the person at the center of it, everything is different. Because choices like that don't fade with time. They echo through every appearance, every obligation, every moment where personal identity and public expectation begin to blur. And if that path is taken, If Zara Tindall ever steps fully into that role, she won't just be carrying a title. She'll be carrying a transition, a bridge between what the monarchy was and what it's trying to become. Not defined purely by tradition, not sustained purely by legacy, but shaped by relevance, by connection, by the ability to stand in front of a modern world and still matter within it. And that's not something a title alone can create. It requires presence, discipline, endurance, the same qualities that defined her life long before this conversation ever existed. Which is why, if the moment ever comes, it won't feel like something new. It will feel like something inevitable, as if all the distance she maintained from the crown was never distance at all, but preparation. Preparation for a role she never chased, but may one day be asked to accept. And if that happens, the story won't be about a title being given. It will be about a line being crossed. Quietly, irreversibly, from independence to institution, from private life to public duty. And in that crossing, something is always left behind, not forgotten, not erased, but changed, because no one steps into history without becoming part of it. And once you become part of it, you no longer control how the story is told, only how you choose to live inside it. So whether that moment arrives or remains only a possibility, the meaning stays the same. Power isn't always about what you gain. Sometimes it's about what you're willing to give up to carry it. And in the end, that's the truth no headline can fully capture. That behind every crown, there's always a cost. And behind every decision, a life that will never be the same again.